Hello, I'm Michelle Chapman, and I'd like to talk to you about something that actually you already know. We all do. But it's something that most people forget most of the time. And I'd like to talk to you about why it's so important that we remember this and remind ourselves of this on a regular basis, and the impact that it can have on your life if you do so. Because just by remembering something so simple, we can completely transform our entire experience of this life. Now, we live as human beings in between two worlds. Like, we live in this physical world. We have a physical body, it has form, it has matter. And we live in this physical body in this physical world. But we also live in the world that we create inside our heads. Because although we live in a physical world, a real world, we can't experience that directly. Because the mind, it does two things. Firstly, it acts as a filter. So through the thoughts that show up inside our minds, we actually filter and change and distort the external environment. So we don't experience the world in any kind of pure fashion. We don't experience the way reality unfolds. We can't. It's just beyond our capability. If we were aware of everything that was going on in the world, even in just the small space that we're in, it would be sensory overload. We can't do that. So the mind acts as a filter. However, what it also does is it acts as a projector. And this is the most powerful thing that we can do and that we do as human beings. Everything that happens in the world happens because someone thought a thought. Wars are started because someone thought a thought. Relationships are started and ended. Jobs are started, jobs are continued, experiences are had, children are made. All of these things happen because someone thought a thought and then acted on that thought. This is what happens. So the mind, our thoughts, thought itself is the most powerful thing in this world. So every training that I run, every client that I work with, I always make sure that they understand two things. Firstly is that they understand themselves. Because so much of what goes on in our mind we don't really see. So much is unconscious, it's outside of our conscious awareness. So the more that we can become aware of ourselves, the more conscious we become of ourselves, the easier it is to get ourselves out of holes and pickles that we find ourselves in. The easier it is to understand why we get stressed about certain things and how we can stop that, how we can change it. Why we hold ourselves back from being the person that we are really here to be and the person that we can be, and how we can turn that around so that we get to thrive and love life. That is really important. Understanding ourselves is so important. But equally as important, and arguably, if not more so, is understanding how the mind works. Understanding that actually we live in this thought-created reality. Our mind acts as a projector, that as we go through life, we are projecting on things all the time. We project on circumstances that we find ourselves in. We project ourselves onto people. Every time you meet someone, you think, oh, what a great guy. Or you think, oh, I don't particularly like him very much. Or whatever it is, we project those thoughts onto other people. And again, it's not a problem in and of itself, because it's the way we're made. It's the way that we are created as human beings, is that we live in this thought-created reality, this projection of ourselves. So it's great. The issue comes about when we don't understand that. And so we think that our problems and our challenges are real when in fact they're not. So very often people become aware that they don't like their thoughts. They might be thinking anxious thoughts, and they feel those feelings of anxiety associated with those anxious thoughts. They might become aware that they are a worrier, or that they get very down and depressed, or that they have thoughts that beat themselves up all the time, or tell them that they can't do things rather than, really being on their own team and supporting themselves. So they become aware that, that they don't really love themselves in the way that they notice that some other people do. So we can become aware that we are having thoughts that aren't working for us, and we want to do something about that. And one of the ways which we can do this in every area of our life, whether it's, changing the way that we think in the workplace so that we get that next promotion and we move on and our careers thrive and flourish, or whether it's how we bring ourselves to our relationships. If we've got a marriage that's kind of gone off a bit off track and it doesn't seem to be working the way that it used to, or we're struggling with other family members or situations, or our health, whether we have problems with our health or we just worry about our health, we can become aware that we're having these thoughts that aren't working for us. And one of the ways in which we can change that, and I would argue one of the most powerful ways that we can change our thinking, is by changing the relationship we have with thought itself. Because what I notice, and I work with people, hundreds of people all the time, and most of them have one thing in common. And I'm struggling now to think, is it everybody? And pretty much it is. That the problem that people have is that they have a poor relationship with thought. And that is the fundamental difference between people who have healthy thoughts and productive thoughts and they live great lives, is not that they have perfect quality of thinking. It's not that their mind has these wonderful short thoughts that show up all the time, probably more often than those who don't have that experience. But there's a reason for that. And that's because they have a different relationship with thought itself. So if I have these thoughts show up inside of my mind and I take them really seriously, and I have a negative thought show up, or I have a worrisome thought, or I have a really down day, if I take that really seriously, that can not only ruin my day, but it can send me on a downward spiral. I've known people say that when they've had periods of depression in the past, and then the minute they have a down day, they panic because they think, oh my God, I'm going there again. And the reality is that we all have down days. We all have times when we don't feel that great. But if I then read that thought and take that as meaning, oh my God, I'm going downhill again, I'm going to spiral, then it's the relationship with thought itself that's causing the problem. So it's not something that I can say to you, you live in a world of your own thought created reality. Okay, so when you're having scary thoughts, it's just your thinking. Don't worry about it, Most people don't hear that. And so for most people, it's not that useful. The difference is when you do hear it, when you do start to see for yourself that actually this is something that's happening real time. When I'm thinking about all the awful things that have happened to me in the past, my head is in the past, but I'm not in the past. I can't be in the past because I can only be here and now. So once we start to see this, when we start to see that thought is something that's showing up real time, which means that it's something that we can do something about right now. And it's also something that we don't have to take that seriously. That gives us freedom. That is what I call it, psychological freedom, because psychological freedom is not about always having beautiful thoughts in your mind. It's probably about having beautiful thoughts most of the time. However, it's also about knowing that just because a thought shows up inside your head, it doesn't mean that it's important. It doesn't mean that it means anything about you. And the more we start to see this, the freer that we become. So I would like to invite you to come on a bit of a journey. I'd like to invite you to come on a journey of understanding yourself and your mind so that you get to live a life that you really love. And that might sound corny. I'm a bit of I really hate corny, cheesy. And I'm aware that sometimes something comes out of my mouth and I think, oh, Michelle, that sounds really cheesy. But it also happens to be true. It is totally possible for us all to lead amazing lives that we love, that we enjoy, that we live and are present to. That is possible for all of us. And that's something that I would love for you to see for yourself.